So remember, don't stop until desire is real. You'll give your desire. Just let the desire actually real. Right, same for the desire. And on my desire, I'm waiting for the desire to be real. Okay, you'll sync it up. Wait for it to be real. Right?
No.
Design to Jenny.
Welcome, dear students and teachers and parents, and of course, welcome to anybody that is online watching our feed. So the day has finally arrived that the Class 11 students have been working towards for 9 months. And in actual fact, they have been working towards this for much, much longer. I can remember even in grade 8 having discussions with the students about what they would like to do. This Class 11 project is a culmination of the Waldorf curriculum and it marks the completion of their Waldorf education. There's a long message, if you read the back, about exactly what it is about, but I want to speak particularly about this year. So the students of previous years will tell you that this Class 11 project is not an easy process. You need dedication, commitment, and hard work. And the project requires you to be taken out of your comfort zone. However, this year, the students will tell you another story. They will tell you the COVID-19 story, which added to their stress, added to their workload, and required them to have much more commitment and dedication. Most of the students had to contend with the change of plan, particularly with regards to their practical component, and it required a lot of self-discipline to continue because their mentors and myself as guardian were only available online. In the months of lockdown and online schooling, I could hear the uncertainty and panic in the class, but my class continued to work with their projects and they did what they could with regards to their practicals. Once we came back, we had to reset all our due dates, and then the pressure was really on to complete, making their books, meeting their mentors, writing their practicals, introductions and conclusions and preparing their speeches. To say it was pressured is actually an understatement. It was unbelievably pressured on them, and every week they had a deadline. I want to sincerely congratulate each and every one of you students for the way that you have really worked on this project and pulled it together. And I wish you lots and lots of luck. For those who are online, please note that we only have one camera, so the camera will follow demonstrations. So without further ado, I want to welcome KV up.
The plants have enough spirit to transform our limited vision. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, pupils and teachers. My name is Geobaka Lenepa, and as you could hopefully tell from my quote, my project was associated around plants, but more precisely, the medicinal use of herbs, which some of you may know more than others. In brief terms, herbal medicine is the use of medicinal plants to cure or treat an illness. Medicinal plants in this sense being plants with healing properties. This has been the basis of medicinal treatment through much of human history. I'm sure many of you have experienced your parents giving you a treatment that was mainly plant-based. I surely have as such cost-effective parents. But this is a prime example of herbal therapy. The parts used for plant therapy is seeds, berries, roots, leaves, fruits, bark, the flower, and the herb in itself. Most of our ancestors come from animistic cultures which believe that all things hold a spirit, including plants in themselves. Therefore, they use plants and other natural resources in order to heal themselves. Since approximately 60,000 years ago, human beings have looked for herbs and drugs within nature. And in this sense, I'm talking about the ones that will not land you in prison. But through our ancestors practicing this on a day-to-day basis, this shows how instinctive herbal medicine is to the human being. A lot of the time, they would not specifically know enough information concerning which plants could be utilized to cure that specific illness. Therefore, they would have to practice various different experiments. And through these failed experiments, they were able to see which plants could truly be utilized to cure them. Herbalism started by women preparing food and healing potions for their clans. And today, 80% of the population, mainly Asia and Africa, use herbal medicine for some primary healthcare aspect, whether this is concerning spiritual reasons or because chemical drugs are just too expensive. Traditional Chinese medicine accounts for 40% of all healthcare delivered, as well as more than 90% of all general hospitals in China hold units for traditional medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine encompasses a range of practices, but herbal medicine is the core part of it. 3 of the most top-selling herbal medicines are Jinkbu biloba, used for the preventing of sickness, cognitive disorders, and dementia. Garlic, used to treat colds, boost the immune system. And ginseng, which is used to boost one's energy and lower one's blood pressure and cholesterol levels. Another place that is particularly very included with this herbal medicine is India. The Indian subcontinent is a vast repository of medicinal plants and is also the largest producer of medicinal herbs. It is estimated that more than 7,800 units are involved in the production of natural health products. And this requires almost about 2,000 tons of medicinal plants' raw material annually. Another herbal medicine hotspot is Africa. Herbal medicine was once termed primitive by Western medicine, and today it is widely practiced by traditional healers. Herbal medicine is a growing field with a long history behind it. During the past 2 decades, public interest in natural therapies has increased drastically, and especially in industrialized countries. Throughout my practical, I decided to investigate the effect of natural medicine on skin as well as internal sicknesses, such as headaches and the common flu. My practical was split into 2 categories, which were growing the actual herb in itself and using the herbs to make a remedy that could be utilized to cure an illness. The remedies were in liquid or paste form. Internal illnesses mainly required a liquid or the herb in itself, and external factors required a paste or the herb in itself once more. I treated myself, my mother, and my father. I decided to treat my mild acne, which was situated around my chin, forehead, as well as nose, by applying a paste nightly. The paste consisted of aloe vera, balbanella, and lemon. I mashed it all into one bowl, applied it every night, and by the 20th day, my acne cleared with help of a healthier diet. I realized that the main reason why my acne was able to clear was because of the herbs that I utilized. They are all known for cleansing rashes and also cleansing the dirt within skin. My second experiment was prevailed through my mother and her constant headaches. I was able to come up with a temporary solution by asking her to chew on a raw mint leaf, as well as asking her to consume chamomile tea. Spearmint is a well-known headache reliever, and chamomile is a great relaxation supplement as well. After she took a 2-hour nap, she woke up feeling more energetic and the heaviness of her head had subsided. Thirdly, my father caught the common flu. I treated this with a simple mixture of ginger, lemon, and honey. The benefit of this tea is that it tastes good as well as it acts on the actual problem in itself and boosts the immune system so that you can get healthier quicker. After a week, he felt a lot more better, the tightness of his chest has cleared, and he felt less drowsy. Although I wish I could have broadened my experiments with medicinal herbs, I still found the project very fascinating, and I am truly thankful for the school, Mrs. Godnington Jr., as well as Desi Horseman, for allowing me and guiding me to expand my knowledge on herbal medicine. Thank you for listening to my speech. The next one to present is Zarema Antonio.
Yoga teacher and author Ralph Gates once said, open quote, "Yoga is not a workout, it is a work in, and this is the point of spiritual practice, to make us teachable, to open up our hearts and focus our awareness so that we can know what we already know and be who we already are," close quote. Good afternoon, parents, teachers, and students. My name is Rema Antonio, and my project is on yoga. Going into yoga at first, I thought of it as just doing yoga postures and movements that provide exercise and good stretches. But as I went deeper into my yoga experience, I found out that there was more to it. There was a passage from a book called from a book called Inner Engineering by Sadhguru that gave me a really great description of what yoga really means. It said, yoga is not an exercise. It is not a technique. The science of yoga is being in complete alignment and perfect existence with yourself. It is the science of creating inner situations exactly the way you want them. Yoga is a form of determining who you are and what you want as an individual. Yoga began in northern India over 5,000 years ago. It is a system that aims to unite the human spirit with the divine. It was originally practiced as a means to a balanced, healthy life connected to the self, and the postures were the means to bring about the focus, consciousness, and balance. My focus in my project was on the postures. For my practical, I decided to do different types of yoga, and for each type, I practiced for an hour a day for 5 days. I chose to do yin yoga, iyengar yoga, vinyasa yoga, hatha yoga, ashtanga yoga, and restorative yoga. They each had their benefits. Out of the 6 I chose, I will be discussing my experiences on ashtanga yoga and vinyasa yoga. Ashtanga yoga rejuvenates the body. It tones, strengthens, controls, and increases flexibility. I found this form of yoga to be quite surprising and very unexpected, because I did not expect there to be so many postures done in such a fast period of time. It is described to be an 8-limbed movement yoga meditation, basically a meditative workout. The first day of my 5-day series doing Ashtanga yoga was the most difficult in my whole yoga experience. I struggled to follow most of the movements required of me because the yogi was moving so fast. I was in pain from almost every posture I did, and I also found it hard to follow the breathing sequence. I just wasn't able to feel that calmness that is often a part of a yoga class. However, I did enjoy myself because each time I tried the different postures, I would fall or wobble, and this would make me laugh. The interesting thing about Ashtanga yoga is it follows a set sequence of postures in a flowing movement. So as the days progressed, I got more used to the sequence and was able to sync my breathing with my postures. This allowed the meditation to take place. Vinyasa yoga helps build muscle strength and endurance. It lowers stress and anxiety. As I did Vinyasa yoga, I found it to be a much softer version of Ashtanga yoga because it had a lot of transitions between the poses. There were a few poses that really offered a good stretch. For example, the Warrior Two pose. This pose opens up your chest and lungs. It builds stamina and concentration, as well as improves your circulation. This chest opener really allowed me to take deep breaths. I found Vinyasa yoga the only system of yoga that was a bit of a challenge when it came to my flexibility. However, it didn't faze me because of my experience in acrobatics. I had some nice stretches doing the half splits and standing splits as they stretch your thigh and quad muscles. On day 2 of my 5-day series in Vinyasa yoga, I did a pose called forward bend headstand, which I was able to hold for 5 seconds. I was really proud of that achievement because headstands aren't easy, and I kept falling each time I tried it. 2 of my favorite systems of yoga I did during my practical were yin yoga and restorative yoga, as they were the softest, slowest, and the most soothing. Those 2 are where I delved deep into my meditation and had good naps. This is not the end of yoga for me, as I found some of the things I was looking for within myself. For example, connecting deeply with myself spiritually, opening my mind and clearing my mind of all the bad thoughts about myself, and easing my anxiety. I want to continue doing yoga, specifically yin yoga and restorative yoga. I really did enjoy the benefits. I felt happier and more healthy. I became more fit and emotionally free. The result of all this is that I didn't get as easily angered as I used to. I feel yoga has changed me, and I want to continue to see how far I can take it. In one of the yin yoga sessions I did, there was a passage that really stood out to me from a book called Tao Te Ching, which said, "Fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. It is the only path to serenity." I'd like to thank my mentor, Ms. Doniki, for everything she has done to help me with my project. Her dedication to always keeping me on track on how I should edit my work and what ideas I should incorporate. I'd like to thank Mrs. Footer for pairing me with the best mentor ever. I'd also like to thank my mom and my brother for being a great tech crew. My mom allowing me to finish a cell phone storage with all my yoga videos, and my brother for taking pictures when I needed them. I'd like to thank the school for giving me the opportunity of doing yoga. This truly was an unforgettable experience. Thank you.
I don't even feel at home, but I think it feels okay. I don't need no key. I just wake up, you want me to leave. I don't even feel no love, only between the sheets. Only time you notice me. When I make you feel right, you'll see what I see. Kiss me goodnight. Waking up to the sunlight, you only want me overlay. Talk back to the name. You don't ever say forever, laying next to me. But nights like this, I wish I never said that I was free. You don't ever say forever, laying next to me. But nights like this, I wish I never said that I was free. I'm always going to take your calls, talking about come and see me. I know we ain't that deep. I'm still coming away. Maybe you change. I don't worry about you. Worry about whatever you need. Always give it to you for free. And I know that you're right. You don't see what I see. Kissing me goodnight. Waking up to the sunlight. You only want me overlay. Talk less of the name. You don't ever say forever, laying next to me. But nights like this, I wish I never said that I was free. You don't ever say forever, laying next to me. But nights like this, I wish I never said that I was sorry that I'm in my head, holding on to words I said. I'm big, sorry, I just can't see you with someone that isn't me. You should know I've been trying to find my peace. I know it's difficult being with you. I just wanna love you this way, and you just make it so hard for me. You can't help me. You can't help me.
Namaste. Next will be Jennifer Raymond.
Don't let anyone tell you you're weak because you're a woman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've done female boxing for my project. The reason why I chose female boxing for my project was because I knew a little bit about the history of it and I wanted to find out more. The sport itself really interested me because I enjoy sport and this was something a little bit out of my comfort zone. Women's boxing first appeared in the Olympic Games at a demonstration bout in 1904. The Swedish Amateur Boxing Association sanctioned events for women in 1988. At the end of the 20th century, the International Boxing Association accepted new rules for women's boxing and accepted the first European Cup for women's boxing in 1999 and the first World Championship for women in 2001. Women were not allowed to fight in the 2008 Olympics. It was later announced on the 14th of August 2009 that the International Olympic Committee's Executive Board had approved the inclusion of women's boxing for the Games in London in the 2012 Olympics. In the 2009 hearings, ABA, the International Olympic Committee, agreed to include 3 additional women's weight classes to the 2012 Olympic Games. However, a new gender-appropriate women's boxing uniform was in the works. This would require women under ABA rules to wear skirts during competition. Traditional role sentiment was prominent to the news of women and skirts. To include top amateur coaches who had been documented stating, women are made for beauty, not to take blows to the head, and by wearing skirts, it gives a good impression, a womanly impression. This issue was widely ignored until amateur boxer and London student Elizabeth Plank brought light to the issue and created a petition at change.com to end the sex-based mandatory uniforms. Boxing has a variety of different equipment. Boxers use different gloves to train with and for matches. People who are just starting off with boxing do not need to get equipment, as they can use their equipment at their boxing gyms. If you want to become a professional, you'll need to get your own equipment so that you can train at home and not just at your gym. Over the years, as boxing has developed, they have designed different shapes of bags to work on specific aspects. A professional boxer has a very strict diet. You basically only eat for the energy, not for the joy or taste. I have personally tried it for a few days and it did not last long. Your food choices are limited. You can't have white bread, spinach, red meat as it takes longer to digest than white meat, sugar, and many more. Some professional boxers, like my coach, are personal trainers at boxing gyms. Being a personal trainer is not only hard for the client, it is also hard for the trainer. When they work on the pads with you, they're also working on their arms. They then have a certain time that suits all of the trainers at the gym where they're all free and they train themselves. They train for about 2 or 3 hours. The first hour they use for skipping, and the second they work on the pads or the boxing bag. Even after their tiring workout for the day, they are still most likely to have more clients afterwards. I'm just a beginner boxer, so I work for 1 hour. It seems like little time, but it does take away all your energy from you at the end of the session. I skip for 10 minutes and work on the bag and my footwork for 9 to 12 minutes. We work in rounds. This means that every 3 minutes of working, I have a short break, just to catch my breath and have a small sip of water. My coach does not let me drink too much water because drinking a lot of water can lead to a stitch or slowness because your stomach will be too full of water. We then move on to the pads, and while working on that, he makes sure that I'm punching correctly and stepping the way that I'm supposed to when I throw a punch. I find it really fun to work on the pads, but at the same time tiring. I started to learn slowly on how to work on the speed bag. The speed bag allows your arms to move fast because when you punch it, it comes bouncing back. It is tough to learn on the speed bag as your arms have to be in the right position and you have to get the timing right. Otherwise, you have to try again if you punch it wrong. Many boxers use medicine balls as it is used to help strengthen your abdominal muscles. It is also used to improve the punch resistance of a boxer's abdomen. This is done by dropping the medicine ball on the abdomen of the boxer to stimulate a punch from the opponent. There are various weights of a medicine ball. It ranges from 3 kgs up to 10 kgs. To become any good at traditional boxing, which requires you to spar with a partner, you have to do lots of fitness boxing classes. Fitness boxing classes requires you to usually throw punches in the air or at a boxing bag. If you're in a class, you are most likely to follow what the instructor does while listening to fun jamming music that really gets you going. Some of the moves you do include a combination of large sweeping punches like crosses, hooks, and uppercuts, smaller punches like jabs, and short, quick steps forward and back. You also do quite a few squats, which play as the ducks in boxing to get used to the momentum. Another type of boxing class that you could be involved in involves strength training, stretching, and hitting a punching bag. Boxing has many health benefits, strength being one of them. You are swinging your arms, moving the muscles of your arms and shoulders, increasing your upper body strength. And when you're in a boxer crouch with a wide stance, with your knees slightly bent, you're strengthening your core muscles, back and legs. Having stronger muscles makes life a bit easier for you. You are able to get out of a chair easier or carry a few extra bags of shopping. Fitness boxing is also a great aerobic exercise. Aerobic exercises get your heart pumping, and it can lower the risk of high blood, heart diseases, stroke, and diabetes. It can also strengthen bones and muscles, burn more calories, and can lift your mood. Aerobics can boost your endurance. This can help you climb a flight of stairs with ease, or you are able to walk further. One last benefit of fitness boxing. When you do it while standing, it will better your balance. You are changing your position and challenging your balance. The more you do that, the better your balance reaction becomes. If you encounter a crack on the sidewalk, you may be more successful protecting yourself because your strength and reaction time may have improved. There are a lot of basic steps in boxing that you should learn before you start with the combinations because it will be a lot easier to learn quickly. To start off with boxing, you should stick to one stance that you can get comfortable with. Once you start to learn a few of the combinations, it gets a lot easier to work on the bag when you don't have an instructor telling you what to do. It then becomes enjoyable when you are able to work on your own and just throw some of your own combinations. My experience about learning about the history of women's boxing and the techniques of boxing that I've learned has been really phenomenal. In regard to the way that women have had to fight to be able to box has been really awful. The women back then must have had to have a really strong mindset to actually have men control them and tell them what they can and cannot do. When I started with the practical work of the project, I found it really challenging at first because my body was not used to at how hardcore the sessions were. Once I moved to 4 sessions a week, I found it a lot easier because the more I pushed myself, the easier it became. I started noticing changes in my body, like gaining muscle in my arms and legs mainly, and I could feel my core was stronger. Learning all the stances, rules, and the type of boxing styles was without a doubt the second most interesting thing I learned, next to the history of female boxing. I was intrigued when I looked up all the information of boxing because before I started doing the practical side of it, even when I just started, I never knew any of it. Learning the type of stance and technique that I personally do was really cool. I feel really privileged to have been able to go through this experience with the support that I had. I'm happy that I was able to learn something that I may be able to use to protect myself in the future. I want to thank the school, Miss Korea for the help and support as my mentor, and for my parents for allowing this to happen. Thank you. I'll now call up Desire.
Good evening, teachers, classmates, and other parents. My name is Desai Munanyana, and the topic that I've chosen for my presentation is 2D animation. Why did I choose this? Well, Ever since I was a little child, I've always loved watching cartoons. I was always intrigued by animation. I was always asking myself, how do they do that? I knew it was drawings, but I just didn't know how they made the characters jump, run, and move. I loved it because it wasn't real. It was like seeing someone's imagination come to life. So at the time, I didn't know it was called animation, so I just referred to it as cartoons. But as soon as I knew it was called animation, I knew immediately that I wanted to become an animator. I did try to animate back then, but I didn't even know where to begin, and I didn't understand the whole concepts of animation. When I came to this school, one of my friends told me about the grade 11 speech where you pick a professional topic for a year, you present it, experience it, and show what you've done for it. The presentation, but this was back in grade 8, right? But immediately I knew what I wanted to do, and that was animation. However, as I'll explain in a bit, there are many different types of animations, but I chose 2D animation because I wanted to be able to make my drawings come to life. Today's animation is mainly done with computers, with CGI being the most common. CGI has given us animations like Home, Moana, Frozen. The kids of this generation probably won't even remember the time when animation was just a drawing on a paper. But let's go way back in time to when Mickey Mouse was just an idea in Walt Disney's head, to when pictures started to move. So let's start in 1609 with the Magic Lantern. The Magic Lantern was a projector that projected images of monsters in front of a live audience. It was mostly used to just project monsters. Sometimes, but a human would be manipulating the pictures as it would be going. And people who had never seen this before would think it was real and it would stun them. But this is not like the animation we know of today, right? Because it was being manipulated by a human in front of a live audience. Animation is a series of images that pass by the human eye very fast, creating an illusion of movement. This is because an object seen by the human eye stays mapped in the retina for a brief time after viewing. An example of this is a flip book. If you flip the book as the images are in a sequence, it'll look like the object in the book is moving. The first real animation device was the Filmotrope. It was invented in the 80s. It was a toy that had 2 pictures on each side of a disc. On each side of the disc had two strings that you would spin. As you would be spinning it, the images on both sides of the disc would merge and look like it's on one side. But this is technically animation, but it was not the only animation device in the 80s. Then came the Zoetrope. It was a spinning cylinder that had a ring of pictures on the inside of it. It could only show a cycle of images though. If you spun it and looked through the slits on the outer layer of the cylinder, it'll look like something's moving. For example, a run cycle, a walk cycle, or whatever images you put inside of it. When cameras came about in the 90s, animation was really able to come to life. There was a form of animation called the humorous phases of funny faces. This is basically a drawing of a man and a woman that would have things slowly added to them. In 1914, the first animated character was designed, and she was called Gertie the dinosaur. This film began with Gertie being given commands by her creator. So the creator would say bow, and she would. I'm pretty sure most of you guys have heard about Walt Disney. Walt Disney, in 1928, created his first film called Steamboat Willie, which had 2 characters that we still know today as Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. This was Disney's first character that was the captain of a steamboat. Everyone has actually seen a snippet of this because in the beginning of every Disney movie, there's a scene where Mickey Mouse is spinning the wheel of a boat, whistling. If you have not watched it, you should watch it because it's Walt Disney's first film. The animation was not only, the film was not only famous for its animation, but it was the first animation to have music and sound added to it. And if you watch this, you'll see how Walt Disney shows that. Animation has its debut in 1929 because of Black Thursday, which starts the Great Depression. The stock market crashes, a lot of money is lost, people lose their jobs, which leads to the 10-year depression. People didn't have lots of money, people were bored and frustrated. Where do you think they went when they were bored? They went to the theater. So I'm not sure whether it was free or cheap, but I knew that everybody wanted to go watch the new animations that were coming out in the theater. And because of this, more and more animations were being made. And this inspired Walt Disney to create a new film that would change the course of animation forever. It came out in 1937, and it was called Snow White. I want to sidetrack for a little bit. When I become an animator, I want to be able to create a character that will outlive me, like Walt Disney did. He created Snow White in 1937. That means she's around about 83 years old, and she doesn't even have one wrinkle. So, if you've watched this film, you can agree that the movements are lifelike and real. The reason for this is because they use a technique called retroscoping, which is basically where they take a video of someone dancing, and then the animator will trace over all the frames and make an animation in cell animation. Cell animation works like a video. Animation is a series of pictures that pass past your eyes very quickly, creating the illusion of movement, as we already know. FPS is the term that we use to regard to this. We don't actually call them pictures. FPS stands for frames per second. So this tells us how many frames are going past your eyes every single second. So there's 12 FPS, which shows us just a little bit of a glitch. You can almost pick up the individual frames. If you've watched the film Into the Spider-Verse, you'll see how the frame rate is very slow, and you can see it's a little bit glitchy. Then there's 24 FPS. Most of the films are using this because the animation is seamless. You can't pick up the individual frames. Then there's 50 and 60 FPS, but at that point, your animation is as smooth as butter. So the next time you go into the cinemas and you reach down to pick up your drink for 3 seconds, you've probably missed 72 frames, which is about a week's worth of work with no sleep. Snow White was filmed at 24 FPS, and the film was about 1 hour and 24 minutes, which means there was 2,112 individual frames that were slightly different from each other. That takes patience. For Snow White, the animators used a piece of equipment called a multi-depth camera. This would increase the background elements. The background was drawn on a multi-depth camera that would chop up the background into different layers, giving the background more depth. Does anyone want to guess how much Walt Disney made from this film? No? He made $3.8 million from this. Now on to the next type of animation, which is stop motion animation. It was the best animation to make monsters look real. Stop motion animation is the same as cell animation when it comes to frames, right? But it is the most tedious out of all of them because it can sometimes take a week to animate somebody take one step. The only difference between the two animations is that in stop motion animations, you use an actual object. So for example, you have a toy of a man. You slowly move him, take a picture, move him again, take a picture, and do that again and again until you have your animation. Steve Jobs, Ed Catmull, and John Lester, these three men created a film in 1986 that would change the course of animation, as well as Walt Disney. And they created a company that we all know today as Pixar. They created a new type of animation called CGI. CGI just means computer-generated images. Animation was now possible on computers. CGI, it's pretty simple. You basically just create a 3D model of a character out of tiny triangles on a computer, then you move them around like a puppet. This was so new, people loved it to the point where it almost put cell animation out of business. Right? I lost my spot. In 1995, Pixar created a new film called Toy Story. I'm pretty sure most of you guys know about it. And they made $350 million from it. In 2003, CGI dazzled the world with this new film, Avatar. This was mainly used using CGI. The film used it by putting people into suits with lights on them, which would track each of their movements. They even were able to track people's facial expressions so that you could have emotion. So nobody had to animate every frame by themselves. The actors would become the character. I heard that Avatar 2 is coming out in 2021, and I'm excited to see what they've been working on all these years. Even though CGI has had most of the glory for the past few years, 2D animation is still making good films and TV shows. 2D animation has also upgraded because you are also now able to animate, 2D animate on computers. But there's one type of animation that I can't live without, and that's anime. It is quite popular to the young generation, and it is used, it's just the Japanese version of animation, and it's mainly used to show their culture. And now to talk about my experiences with 2D animation. To be honest, starting was the problem. I was never really good at drawing in the beginning, so I had to first get practice with a drawing, and that was not easy. I couldn't even draw a head to start with. But my friends Chris, Ethan, and Aman really helped me by teaching me a few tips and tricks that would help me with my animation. And then I started animation. This was frustrating because I had to learn all the different techniques and tricks and put them into one animation. And it takes a lot of time to do this. In the beginning, I didn't think I was going to be able to do 40 hours. But after the first week, I had already done 14 hours. And when I went over 72 hours, I stopped counting. There were times where I wanted to give up because it just wasn't looking right. But I kept going, right? Because you never know how it'll finish. Well, you never know how it'll look when it's done if you give up. These are just my best ones that I picked out of the bunch. There's ones that are very bad compared to these. But overall, I had fun doing animation and learning and creating animations. And this is honestly just the beginning for me. I'd like to thank my parents for getting me all the equipment I needed for this. I'd like to thank my friends for criticizing my drawings and getting me better at drawing. And I'd like to thank most of all Ms. Pinheiro and my external mentor, Tumi, for helping me get through this, even though we were not able to do our normal meetings, and just encouraging me to do my best. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Aman.
Onegashimasu. Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you put it in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friends. This is one of my favorite quotes from the martial arts master himself, Bruce Lee. These wise words are applicable in life by not allowing oneself to go through life with blinkers and being trapped in a certain mindset. Rather, being able to adapt, flow, and change. It is also applicable in martial arts by allowing one's energy to flow where intended. An empty mind is a mind that is not cluttered and therefore ready for combat when required. This brings us to my presentation this afternoon, Fight and Flow, the Rhythms of Martial Arts. Good afternoon, parents, teachers, and friends. I have been exposed to martial arts all of my young life, having been a huge fan of Samurai Jack and having started karate at the age of 3.5, being the youngest in my group. Now I am aiming for my senior black belt. But I'm not here to talk about karate. We were asked to apply ourselves in this project with passion, yet go out of our comfort zones. So I chose to explore 3 different martial arts that I have never tried before. Knife attack. Hey, give me your wallet. Sorry, hey. My wallet is in my pocket. I'm just going to get it. Oh. Here's a picture. Page. Same video.
Shut up. Good cow.
So, are there any Jason Bourne fans here tonight? Or Jason Statham, perhaps? Well, I am a huge fan of both these actors and Krav Maga. Krav Maga fighting styles and techniques are used in fast-paced, high-energy, and very impressive fight sequences used in many martial arts movies. So you can imagine how excited I was when my dad told me that he started Krav Maga. I started my first lessons during December in 2019. Krav, meaning combat, and Maga, meaning contact, is an Israeli martial art created by Imi Lichtenfeld in the 1930s. He used various fighting and fitness techniques that he learned from his father, including acrobatics. He then developed it into his own martial arts during World War II to help the Israeli community defend and protect themselves. Krav Maga is based off of a Hebrew word, retzev, meaning continuous motion. You keep fighting until the opponent can no longer fight. Krav Maga teaches its students to avoid fighting and violence when necessary. However, where this can't be avoided, it teaches the student to immobilize the attacker as quickly as possible while simultaneously looking for an escape route. Some of the techniques incorporated in Krav Maga include boxing, judo, wrestling, Muay Thai, Savati, Jiu-Jitsu, Wing Chun, Karate, and Aikido. We use various training gears, including the monkey suit, which is my favorite. This is a protective suit that we use when we fight much more aggressively. It protects your face, your chest, and your groin. My experience of the lessons were very intense, but I looked forward to all the techniques I would learn. You know, all the action hero stuff. Our instructor, Anthony, was a tad more gentler with our younger group, as we didn't come home with bruises like my dad did. As with most martial arts, fitness is key, so we engaged in obstacle and weight training, core and cardio fitness, and explosive drills. All are very boring, but very necessary training. I enjoyed the actual training, the hand-to-hand combat, punches, kicks, and chokes, where the attacker would run at you. A lot of these were actually easy, as I could apply my karate knowledge to it. But there were challenging ones, which included chokes, strangles, and what to do when an attacker sticks their thumbs in your eyes. This was a tad more horrible to experience. We used many dummy weapons, my favorite being the gun exercises, as I learned all the different parts of a gun. We then moved on to slash attacks, where the attacker swings a pole at you, another stressful one. With these, they require a lot of focus, as you have to learn to time your counterattacks while a pole is being swung at you. Oh, and I have to share this story. During some of our warm-up runs and obstacle courses, our instructor, Anthony, would run up to us, grab us, and say, "Be aware." Are there any Friends fans in the crowd? Remember Ross? Unagi. I certainly look forward to Krav Maga in the future. I'm sure many of you are wondering about this demonstration. Not so martial arts looking, was it? Well, that's because martial arts are usually associated with punches, kicks, and strikes. Tai Chi, however, is an ancient Chinese martial art that is said to have originated over 700 years ago. Some even say the art is well over 1,500 years old. It is not exactly known who created these forms, but it is accredited to a Taoist monk named Zhang Sanfeng. There is a very interesting story to how this was created. He witnessed a fight between a snake, and a crane, and the two forms of the animals inspired him to create his own forms, which later became known as Tai Chi Chuan. The snake and the crane. I've heard of many interesting karate movies from back in the day with many interesting titles and forms, many resembling animals. I'm sure many of you parents know about these. Tai Chi is well known for its health benefits, which include physical and mental balance, reduced stress and anxiety, improved flexibility and muscle strength, and better sleep quality. I was drawn to Tai Chi because the gentleness of the art intrigued me. Whilst it looks really easy to follow, it takes a lot of focus to flow at such a slow and easygoing pace, not something I'm used to in terms of martial arts. I also enjoyed how different it was from karate and Krav Maga. I'd call it a moving meditation, because the way I feel after Tai Chi is definitely likened to the way I feel after a meditation. Learning over the internet was quite effortless, as many of the movements were slow enough to learn quite easily. I followed 2 Tai Chi masters. One thing I quite like about Tai Chi is that you can practice it anywhere, indoors and outdoors, and I definitely look forward to practicing it at the beach the next time I go down to the coast. No, next one. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Let me just get it from my mom. I have another speaker. I simply love capoeira, and you have to try it to understand. Capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art that was created by the enslaved Africans in Brazil in the beginning of the 16th century. Sorry about that, it was really intense. Much of the origins of this art is a blur, as it was practiced in secrecy. Capoeira is known for its acrobatic and complex maneuvers, many involving hands on the ground, inverted kicks. It emphasizes on flowing movements rather than fixed stances. Add some music and live drum beats and the game begins. A person who practices capoeira is known as a capoeirista. What does one do with capoeira in terms of martial arts? Well, in my opinion, capoeira is meant to be enjoyed and experienced. Well, that's how I'm experiencing it. It was quite challenging to learn on YouTube, as many of the movements got very complex. It involved both attack and defense techniques, which used hands and sweeping leg movements. These were combined with acrobatic movements like cartwheels. The first move I learned to do was the jinga, which is the most basic rhythmic side-to-side leg movements, and it is the fundamental movement of capoeira. It's important for both attack and defense, and has two main objectives. One, to keep the capoeirista in constant motion, so that they are not open to an attack. The second is to mislead, fool, and trick the opponent so that they are open to an attack or a counterattack. As a game, it does not focus on knocking down or destroying the opponent. Rather, it emphasizes on one's skills. I look forward to the face-to-face classes. This martial art form is definitely one that needs human interaction and being a part of a capoeira group. More importantly for me would be to train under a capoeira master so that I can learn more of the complex maneuvers. I do hope my speech has been enlightening around martial arts for you, and that I have piqued your interest around one or two of the martial arts. Now that you know there is so much more to martial arts than most people assume. The ones I chose turned out to be ones that I will definitely pursue, and I really look forward to doing them. And I am really grateful I had this opportunity to experience them. I would like to offer my gratitude to my mentor, Mr. Mitambo, for all your guidance and support, to Ms. Futter for all your love and patience, to Anthony from Krav Maga, and to my mom, who introduced me to karate at such a young age, to my dad, who inspired me to do Krav Maga. I would like to thank Michael Mount Waldorf for the amazing educational curriculum, which allows us to explore life and everything in it. Domo arigato gozaimashita. Otsukara samarashita. Sayonara. And thank you for giving me your attention. Next up, we have Niketsu. Next up, we have Ketsi.
Good afternoon, dear parents, fellow classmates, and everyone that has joined us online. For my project, I've chosen to remodel the interior of a car. My name is Moiketsi Masilo. Due to Corona, I was not able to fully pimp my ride and respray the car. With respraying a car, first all the dents and scratches need to be removed. Then the decision became clear. Because the car would sadly most likely be my sister's, why take out all the scratches and dents that would eventually return? The car I was working on was a Toyota Conquest. That was my mother's first car, which she purchased in 1996. And in 2010, it was parked into the garage and not touched till I came along. The Toyota Conquest was one of the various Toyota Corollas that was released in South Africa. The Toyota Corolla E90 was introduced in 1987 and was the sixth generation of cars sold by Toyota under the nameplate Corolla. In every country, there was different names for the E90 for maximum sales, but there will be one version that looks exactly the same, although there might be minor changes in the engine. The Conquest started it for Toyota in South Africa. It was an instant hit with consumers, combining the safety and youthful aesthetics of a hatchback. It gave the necessary and much needed alternative to the Volkswagen Series 2, which had the dominating sale charts at the time. The Toyota Tazz was released in 1996. Toyota SA took the Conquest nameplate and relaunched its compact hatchback as the Tazz. Although the Conquest Tazz looks very similar to the Conquest, once they put side to side, the minor differences can be seen. Toyota Motor Corporation was founded in 1937 by a man named Kachiro Toyota. The company was named after him. The company was named Toyota instead of Toyota because people thought it sounded better. Akio Toyoda is the current president of the Toyota company. In 1936, production started for its first car, the Model AA, which is a four-door sedan and a three-gear manual. As a child, I was always drawn to cars. There were many times where I would just sit in a car and imagine driving it. I may not know what car's driving by just by the sound of its engine, but my love for cars has been there since I was 12. The car I was working on did not have many problems besides the battery being dead and it not being serviced for years. But there was an upside. It had a full tank of gas. On January 29, 1886, Carl Benz made the first ever car with a single seat. At the time, seats were not the main priority. Seats were not the main priority of a car because they were meant for the wealthy and could not take people far distances that people take today. And by the looks of it, seats were not made for the comfortability. The actual seat consists of a metal frame that is screwed onto the car and a foam cushioning. This foam cushioning is covered by a material to protect it. Car seats and other parts of a car interior are covered up with fabric, real leather, and artificial leather. The main durability requirement of a car seat material must still be in almost first-class condition after 2 years of use so that the car will have good resale value and must last the lifetime of the car, which may be as much as 15 years or more. Conditions inside a car vary from 0 degrees to well over 120 degrees Celsius, depending upon where you are in the world. In addition to the extreme temperatures, the relative humidity of the close confined area inside the car vary from 0 to 100% continuously in a daily cycle. All materials used as the seat coverings must be able to withstand these conditions, in addition to being sat upon for many years. Changing the seats of a car is not a job for everyone. I removed the seats, door frame, and door panels. Removing everything was relatively easy. To make sure that the seats don't just slide off, hook rings are put on. Hook rings are small metal rings that are hooked from the seat cover and the foam part. As the car seat is being taken off, these hook rings are being clipped off. It is not easy to do so because these hook rings are so small and deep in the seats that they need to be pulled the opposite direction to where the clipping is being taken place. A seat consists of the backrest and the bottom. The car I was working on had 8 separate parts, and I could confidently say I did not get better at this as I went along. I was able to clip a few, but it was inconsistent. Once the old seat covers were off, it was cut into different stencils so it could be traced into the new material. This was done with the roof, door panel, and the door panels as well. Then, once it was cut into different sections, it was sewn together. In grade 8, when we were told to make hoodies, it was the only time I was exposed to sewing machine. With the amount of errors I made with this hoodie, I was not prepared to mess up and have holes in my new seats. And my mom said I would have to use my own money if anything happens, and I do not have the sufficient funds for that. The roof was the easiest to do because all that I needed to do was peel the old material off and put in a layer of glue. Place the new material on gently because the wooden frame was weak. When the driver's seat was done, it was flipped upside down, then fitted to see if any changes needed to be made. Then it was taken off again. Now, when I thought taking the hook rings off was tough, putting them on was just as irritating in the beginning, but eventually I got better at it. Putting the seat cover on was the reverse process of taking it off. Even though it was a tiring experience, I'm glad I did it, and I would like to thank my parents for paying for all the expenses and trusting that I did the work. I'd like to thank my mentor, Ms. Zwane, for guiding me through this tough time. I'll miss our mentor meetings, and I know you will too. I would like to thank the school for giving me this opportunity to expand my knowledge and taking me out of my comfort zone. And I would like to thank all of you who took time out of your day to join me. Thank you. The next speaker will be Julio.
Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for life. Good afternoon, dear parents, teachers, and fellow students. This evening, I'll be presenting my speech on bass fishing. My first expectations for this project, when I chose to do bass fishing and I had no clue what I was doing, were to go out onto the water and not catch a single fish and maybe get a tan if I was lucky. As I learned more about how the fish feed and what time of the day they eat, I felt more confident and I had better expectations for this project. Bass fish are freshwater fish with larger gills and have a unique appetite compared to your normal fish that you would catch in South Africa. Although bass fishing started in the 18th century, United States of America, South Africa is the best place to catch bass, after America, of course. Bass fish have a unique appetite because they tend to go for live moving bait, and this means I'd constantly have to cast and reel in and make the bait look as alive and realistic as possible. Bass won't just eat anything that looks good at the bottom of the dam. Bass are very picky with the bait they hunt for, and their appetite choice changes throughout the day. Bass fishing isn't a cheap sport, and for example, the most expensive rod on the market is the oyster bamboo rod, which is on sale for $4,600. And to put that into perspective, 76,400 Rand, and this is excluding the reel. Bass anglers use specific reels and rods for specific lures depending on the weight. The difference between a normal fishing setup and a bass setup is that the bass rods have very small eyes that you thread the line through, and this is to provide better accuracy when casting into tight areas. The reel, which is called the bait caster, looks very different to your normal spinning reel, and this is also designed specifically for accuracy, and this is more difficult to use, and it takes some practice to get used to, and I know this from experience. Now that you know a little bit about the fish, we can get into more detail on my experience in the field. I had already started fishing for bass in the December holidays. I went to a dam nearby where I stay, and there were 3 different dams. I had a good feeling about the second dam, and that's where I started. I managed to catch 2 bass, but 2 fish wasn't too bad for my first time out on the water, I thought. The next morning, I was on my way to the 3rd dam, and I decided to start early, so I was fishing by 7:30 a.m. This helped a lot because within 10 casts, I had my biggest bass of the day, and mainly because it was the only bass I had caught because my lure had broke, and I decided to call it today at 10 a.m. After that day, I tried to fish at the Vaal River a few months later, and I caught nothing. I decided to give fishing a break after this trip due to lockdown. I watched a lot of pro bass anglers in this time, and this is how I found my favorite lure, the football jig, which Ronald Martin used and completed his first bass fishing event in January and came second and began one of the most well-known bass fishing careers in history in 1970. Ronald won 7 times and finished second 8 times in his first 25 events, which is unreal. This is very good because there are 10,000 members, and Ronald has never placed lower than 16th place in any competition he has entered. To the end of his career, he won his 20th bass event in 1997 and retired a legend after that win, and will forever be remembered in bass fishing history. I was so eager to use this lure, I went back to the water and I managed to catch 8 bass on the football jig, and it'll forever be my favorite lure. I caught 4 other fish on different lures because I got my jig stuck in a tree and I was no longer able to use it, sadly. One of the fishing rules I read up on was called the 3-second rule. There are more different theories that are used by different anglers and an accepted rule among anglers as to how to set a hook when bass fishing. It was called this 3-second rule, and nearly every angler you will come across will know about this rule and will most probably use it. Homer Circle, who said it was the only way to ensure a high hooking percentage and that if you aren't succeeding, you aren't doing it right. The theory was, once you feel a bite, you should wait 3 seconds to fully secure the lure in the fish. Wait 3 seconds for the fish to fully secure the lure in its mouth, and then set the hook as hard as you possibly can. And this only applies to certain lures. If you did that, you're doing it the right way, and if you were set for bass fishing. Other people have said, no matter what anyone tells you, if you feel a bite at the end of the line, don't think twice and set the hook, because fish don't have hands, so when you feel that bite, go for it. This theory stood out to me because I thought as soon as I feel a fish at the end of my line, I should hook it as fast as I possibly can. But then I decided to try this 3-second rule, and it worked 3 for 3 times compared to when I lost a few fish trying to hook them straight away. Match the hatch is an old saying known by bass anglers. Match the hatch was originally used by trout fishermen, and later bass anglers started using this saying as well. Matching the hatch basically means watching the type of natural bait for the fish and choosing a lure that mimics its size, species, and most importantly, color. What would be considered is the hatch, and what you would want to match lures as close as possible to the hatch according to this theory. An example could be a jig, which matches a crawfish. This theory was very popular in competitive bass fishing and for pros that travel to new dams, lakes, and rivers constantly. It is a must-be to be able to determine what bait and colors will work for this time of the year, and it is because the bait tends to change colors according to the time of the year, and some baits are more common in bass areas at certain times of the year. This is where matching the hatch becomes an extremely important thing to do. Matching the hatch is really good for getting started, and it's probably the best way for a new bass angler could start, or going into an unfamiliar dam or lake. This theory helped me a lot because I was new to bass fishing, and it was difficult for me to choose which lure to throw in and what time of the day. But with this theory, I had a better understanding or an idea of what to use. The one thing that stood out to me while I was learning about this project was that I found out that fishermen are the most kind and helpful people you'll ever come across. Does not matter what you look like or what fish you'll go for. They'll try to help you as much as possible, and that is one thing I'll never forget about my fishing experience. Although I did my project all by myself without an out-of-school mentor, I'd like to thank Mrs. Footer, my chosen mentor, for correcting me where I made mistakes and for pushing me to do all my work on time. I'd like to thank my parents for taking me everywhere and getting me all the equipment and for guiding me in the right direction. Thank you for listening to my speech. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'd like to welcome Cameron.
Good morning, everyone, and afternoon, to the people online. I chose to do beer brewing for my project because when I was young, I always wondered why adults would drink beers at bars and restaurants when I, as a kid, was only allowed to drink juice and water. In the last year, I've been cycling from a local brewery, and one day I was offered to take a tour of the brewery. I was amazed at the sizes of the tanks that were used just to brew beer. While I was getting a tour of this brewery, I thought this would be a great idea for my project that Ms. Footer had been asking me about. My first proposal was rejected, but once I had handed in a proper proposal with detail explaining what I wanted to do, I was given the go-ahead from the teachers. Beer is actually the oldest recorded recipe, dating back to 5000 BC, and this was documented on papyrus scrolls by the ancient Egyptians. These beers in those times would have been very strong and harsh by today's standards. Those beers were brewed with things like dates, pomegranates, and other indigenous fruits. Beer eventually made its way to the Middle East and then to Europe, where it became an essential part of life. Modern beer was born in the Middle Ages and was brewed with malted barley for hundreds of years. The use of hops as a bittering and flavoring ingredient was only used much later. Before this, different herbs and spices were used to balance out the flavors. Ingredients have slightly changed since then, but the main parts of the recipe are still the same. There are several steps in the process of brewing. These include mashing, lautering, boiling, fermenting, conditioning, and packaging. Mashing. Mashing is the brewer's term for hot water steeping, which is the process that hydrates the barley, which activates the malt enzymes and converts the grain starches into fermentable sugars. Lautering involves separating the mash into clear liquid wort and residual grain. This consists of 3 steps: mashing, recirculation, and sparging. Boiling. The beer is then boiled to extract the bitterness from the hops and to boil off any unpleasant aroma compounds. The main step in brewing is fermenting. Fermentation is the process where yeast converts glucose in the wort to ethanol and alcohol and carbon dioxide gas. This is what gives the beer its alcohol content and gives it its carbonation. Conditioning. Bottle conditioning, also known as bottle fermentation, is the original method where beer is made sparkling by sitting in the bottle, but in these days, it gets its carbonation from the injection of exogenous carbon dioxide under pressure. The second last step is filtering. Filtered beer refers to any ale, lager, or fermented malt beverage that has had its sediment removed, which was left over from the brewing process. The final step is packaging. This includes packaging the beer into bottles, labeling the bottles, packing them into 6-packs, boxes of 12 or 24, and even into kegs. Brendan Watchman is the brewer of Copper Lake, and he was my external mentor when I started this project. He runs a brewery just outside of Broadacres. My plan was to brew beer at home and also go brew beer at the brewery, but because of this whole lockdown, that changed. Since I wasn't able to brew beer at home, he wasn't my mentor anymore because he didn't know much about home brewing. So my dad stepped in and helped me with the equipment and brewing of the beer. I bought a home brewing kit, which included the ingredients and a thermometer. With the help of my dad, a homemade brewery was made, and I brewed beer from home as best I could with the equipment I had. APA, American Pale Ale, is the beer I chose for my practical. American Pale Ale was invented in the 1980s and should have an alcohol level between 4.5 and 6.2%. I brewed this at home with a homemade brew station in my courtyard and my kitchen. My brewery comprised of a large cooler box, 2 buckets, 1 30-liter pot, and a hosepipe. Before I even started brewing, I had to wash these till they were as clean as possible because any dirt or germs could affect the fermentation process. Brewing beer is definitely harder than I expected, and there's a lot more work to it than people know. I used the cooler box for mashing, drained the water from the hops using a sieve, which took long and definitely could have been done more efficiently. Then I used a 30-liter pot, which I had borrowed from a local restaurant, to boil the soon-to-be beer. While the beer was boiling in the pot, I washed the bucket I was going to ferment and fitted the double bubbler on top of the bucket. Once the beer was done boiling, I had to make sure there were 23 liters of liquid. Unfortunately, I only had 22, so I had to add a liter of water so that it wasn't too strong. I then poured it into the bucket that would ferment it for 4 days. During these 4 days, I collected bottles I had asked the neighbor to keep and clean them. After the first fermentation process of 4 days, I added the dry hop and the 12-day fermentation process started. After 12 days of this bucket sitting in my garage, it was time to bottle the beer. For the 23 liters of beer, I needed 70 bottles, which had been collected in the past few months. The beer needs to be bottled with 123 grams of corn sugar, but instead I just used normal sugar because I didn't have corn sugar. Bottling the beer was an easy process. It just took incredibly long. The beer needed to rest for 30 days before being able to drink, so it was stored in the garage, and 70 bottles of beer started to get in the way and had to be moved around a few times. American Pale Ale is definitely not my favorite beer, but I had 70 bottles of beer, so some was given to my neighbor and the rest was drunk by my dad over lockdown. Beer brewing is definitely more difficult than I expected, and there's a lot more work to it than people know. For the next batch of beer I brew, whenever that might be, I now know the easier way and better way of home brewing. Overall, I enjoyed this process, even though it didn't go as planned. I would have wished I could have brewed beer at a brewery, but I learned a lot about home brewing. Beer brewing is actually a very difficult process. Beer brewing is actually a very difficult process, and when I'm allowed to drink beer in the future, I'll know how much hard work and effort has been put into that beer. Lastly, I'd like to thank my mentor, Miss Miller, for helping me through the whole process, correcting all my mistakes, and helping me through every step. I would just like to thank my dad, who helped me manage this project, fixing every problem or coming up with a solution that I had made or come across. Thank you all for listening. Oh, and the next person to speak is Sabrina.
There was an incident once where a little girl was in an art therapy session and her therapist asked her to draw a picture. The picture she drew was of her father as a snake. The art therapist's immediate reaction was to assume that the little girl disliked her father, as the therapist viewed snakes as scaly, slimy, untrustworthy creatures. Had the therapist left it at that, she would have been given an entirely inaccurate idea of the little girl's situation. The little girl's favorite animals were snakes, and by drawing her father as one, she was showing her bond with her father. There is a common myth about art therapy, where it is said that the art therapist interprets the artwork of and for the patient, whereas, in actual fact, it is a collaboration between the therapist and the client to interpret and process the art. The artwork is an expression of the client's emotions, and no therapist can claim to have the knowledge of the inner workings of a patient's exact emotional processing methods. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, teachers and fellow students. My name is Sabrina Muller-Massis, and as I am sure you would have already figured out by now, tonight I will be talking about art therapy. The primary purpose of art therapy is to help clients heal their mental and emotional injuries as much as they can through the medium of art rather than face-to-face verbal communication. Art therapy, along with any other therapy, provides aid for people experiencing trauma, illness, and with the day-to-day measures of living. According to the Art Therapy Association, art therapy is a type of psychotherapy but uses the medium of creating art to increase a patient's cognitive ability, along with awareness of themselves and others. This helps them to cope with symptoms or limitations brought about by their disability or illness. The theory of which art therapy subscribes to is that of where art therapy integrates psychotherapeutic techniques with the creative process to improve a human's mental health and well-being. The American Art Therapy Association characterizes art therapy as an approach to mental health and utilizes the process of creating art to improve mental, physical, and emotional wellness. The first time in which art therapy was used to see if it could heal people with brain injuries as much as that of conventional therapy was during World War II. Soldiers came back from World War II with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, but others found art therapy which helped them to actually stay alive and get through their troubles. The PTSD of World War II affected the veterans' relationships with people and their families. Art therapy just helped them heal and get back to their relationships and their day-to-day lives without being affected by the PTSD. For the soldiers, it became their rehabilitation. Art therapy specifically helped them as it was easier for the veterans to express themselves and their troubles through art instead of words. Art therapy for veterans was like exploring an invisible wound they could not talk about. In the congressional record, Senator Bob Graham drew attention to the importance of art therapy with US veterans and stated, "Art therapists provide effective treatment and health maintenance intervention for veterans, focusing on all of their life challenges, such as mental, physical, and cognitive impairments. Intense emotion and memory, often difficult to communicate in words, are often more easily expressed in images with the guidance of a trained clinician." In art therapy, an art therapist uses something called an intervention, which could determine the number of sessions a patient would need, and is done throughout the many sessions. An intervention or treatment plan is uniquely designed for each person's individual needs and goals. It is always based on the art therapist's preference of theory. It is made up of art directives as well as free drawings that help the person to bring unconscious material to the conscious and to integrate it so that the person is able to have better functioning. An art therapist could create an intervention around a client's hobby, if possible, such as photography or a specific art technique, style, or material. Art therapy uses many different materials or mediums, and certain materials are used for certain interventions, depending on what the therapist would like the client to explore, as different materials bring about different results and emotions. As the therapist, you would always start your client off with something that they are content or comfortable with and willing to use, like pencils and a scribble drawing, as it is cognitive and easy. As you carry on and are further along into the intervention, you may want your client to access more emotions, which then the art therapist would get them to use watercolors or chalk pastels, for example, as they are not easy materials to control and entices emotions. For small children, you might want to use finger paints or materials that are more sensory. Many believe one has to be an artist to be an art therapist and should stick to the things you know as the art therapist, or practice something quite a bit before presenting the idea to your client. For you as an artist need to know and understand the frustration points of the material or medium, artwork, and process. During this experience, I went through many ups and downs. Firstly, I consider writing my historical as part of my practical, for I had to go on a whole treasure hunt to find the right information, as it was nearly impossible to find the correct history for art therapy specifically. Secondly, I found all of my theory information through my own notes, which I took during each session and lesson with my external mentor and through an actual book, which of course is all about art therapy. And lastly, I found my practical encounters quite fascinating. I learned how a therapist would go about conducting an art therapy session and experienced a mock session. I learned about the many different materials and mediums which are used, about the different assessments a patient could do in art therapy, and about the reasons for each assessment and what they determine. I did a number of my own experientials and therefore confronted some of the stresses and nerves and frustrations a patient might go through when doing an assessment or experiential. There is a quote by the famous artist Pablo Picasso that I have found is quite true, which I believe should be followed by many in the age we live in, and he says, "Painting is just another way of keeping a diary. Art truly does help a person heal and become whole again." Throughout this project, there were too many times where I had felt quite nervous. A few of those times were specifically before each experiential and mock session, then in general regarding each writing process. Before this 9-month journey began, I was extremely eager to get started, but then it became quite stressful and I felt pretty anxious during most of the process. Once the project is finally over, which will of course be right after the speech, I know I will be feeling tremendously relieved. The part of the project which I enjoyed most was the practical aspect, whereas the writing process was my least favorite part. Taking on this topic for the grade 11 project turned out to be an amazing and one very insightful experience, which actually influenced my decision on what I might like to be pursuing as a career one day. And art therapy is definitely a possibility. It is hard work and will be even harder having it as an occupation, but I truly enjoy helping and being there for people, and I will hopefully be helping them in a fun, expressive manner, as art is a powerful tool of expression and is also a magical way of healing and showing one's true self. I would like to thank my internal mentor, Mrs. Footer, for making sure I actually get this project work done. I would like to thank my external mentor, Sarah Asman, for guiding me through this experience and for teaching me the ways and inner workings of an art therapist. Furthermore, I would like to thank the school for the opportunity to have been able to have had this experience. I would definitely like to thank my parents for just being there for me through my many ups and downs throughout this project. And last, but definitely not least, I would love to give a big thanks to the person who held me together, helped me through each step along the way, and who truly made all of this possible for me. Thank you, Hannah Asman. I would like to end off with a quote in the words of Eleanor Ullman. Art is the meeting ground of the world inside and the world outside. Thank you. Up next is Jared.
Good afternoon, teachers, parents, and students. For my grade 11 project, I chose to do video game coding and programming. My speech consists of the historical, theoretical, and practical aspects of my project. Over the last few decades, the process of developing and designing video games has evolved from the first few games that were made in the 1950s. This means that the way video game developers make games is way more efficient than before. The very first video game was made in 1958 by a physicist named William Higginbotham. He invented what is assumed to be the very first game. It was just a very simple tennis game, similar to the classic 1970s game called Pong, and was quite popular during its time. The gaming industry did not really reach mainstream popularity until the 1970s and 1980s, when arcade games and video game consoles were introduced to the general public. Since the 1980s, video gaming has become a popular form of entertainment and a part of modern popular culture, making hundreds of billions of dollars. The second generation of video game consoles began in 1976. The second generation began with the release of the Atari 2600 gaming system. This generation is also known as the early 8-bit era. Many other well-known gaming consoles were released in the second generation. The Atari 2600 was considered to be the most popular during its time. In 2004, the Atari 2600 had sold 30 million units, but unfortunately, the second generation of video game consoles ended in the 1980s. This was because of a tragic incident known as the video game crash of 1983. This video game crash was so bad that it could have very easily been the end of the gaming industry. The video game crash of 1983, also known as the Atari shock in Japan, was an industry-wide recession. Revenues for video game makers dropped in almost 97% in only 2 years. The crash almost destroyed the then growing industry. Too many companies were too optimistic about gaming and tried to jump into the industry too quickly. In some instances, companies that were completely outside the scope of gaming gaming tried to participate, thus causing major issues for the industry. But why did it crash? There are a few reasons why this happened. The first reason is quantity over quality. Video game companies couldn't help but create as many game cartridges as possible. They even believed that customers would buy an entire console just to play certain games. In one instance, Atari rushed development and created 12 million cartridges of Pac-Man, when only 10 million people owned the Atari 2600. Ultimately, the game sold 7 million copies and were met with poor reviews, leaving Atari with an extra 5 million copies in stock. The second reason was unchecked competition. At the time, programmers were able to easily reverse engineer and create unlicensed games. This led to some dirty competition, with gaming companies stealing programs from one another with promises for credit. Copies of the same game with different names were being released on a constant basis. Today, that practice would be equivalent to Nintendo creating a playable Xbox game and releasing it without Microsoft's permission. The third and final reason is competing industries. At the time, personal computers and video game consoles were nearly the same prices. PCs could often process video games better, and they had other programming abilities that made them more attractive to consoles, causing millions of consoles to not be sold. Video games, like all projects, are made in steps. These steps are like a formula of making video games and are used to make all types of games, whether it's 3D or 2D. The first step is the design. A producer or lead designer comes up with a simple premise for a game. This may be a basic storyline, scenario, or some intended moral the designer wishes to impart to the player. They then sit down with the writers and artists and come up with a comprehensive storyline, backstory, script, and any other information necessary to telling a story and incorporating the player to the experience. The next step is gathering data. Three-dimensional designs of all the game's characters and interactive backgrounds are generated on the computer in order for the design team to figure out how they want them to move and act. They will then collect sound bites and hire voice actors to play the parts of each character, recording the entire script digitally to be used in the game's programming. Then it's time to program. Programming is by far the most difficult and time-consuming process. Programmers need to have a firm grasp of multiple computer programming languages, as well as computer logic and mathematics. A large team of programmers may take up to a year to complete their task, which is what will typically make or break a game. If they do a good job, the game company makes money. If not, the company loses money because of cost of development, production, and shipping of the game. After that, it's time to do the testing. When the programmers believe their job is done, the game is tested. Employees play the game inside and out, looking for any bugs, errors, or glitches as a result of the game's programming. They file reports over a matter of months, they file reports on this over a matter of months for the programmers to review and fix the problems. They are also responsible for giving their own opinion of the game, whether the control scheme is intuitive and responsive, and whether the game has the appropriate feel that the designers were aiming for. If everything is up to the tester standards, the game goes into production. The final step is mass production. The entire game is compiled and burned into a single master disk. This disk is then inserted into a specialized machine designed to produce copies of the disk at a high rate of speed. The copies are placed in pre-made plastic cases and then wrapped in plastic to be shipped to distributors across the country. For my practical, I chose to do an online course on video game design using an online school called Udemy. Udemy has developer courses that teach one how to code, design, and program the games. The program consisted of 218 lectures made up of 3-minute to 30-minute lectures. The whole course is exactly 34 hours long. This excludes the time it took for me to do the course material. During this course, I got to learn how to create games from scratch, and at the end of the program, I learned how to make my own fully functioning game. The beginning of the course was a guide of what applications I needed to use to program and design the games. I used an application called Unity as my platform for programming. In the first lecture, I learned about the different tools to use and how to make basic objects. My first project was a street scene. I started by designing a car with just a little bit of detail. It was only the basic shape of a car. The details and colors would be added in later. In the second lecture, I learned how to make a prefab. A prefab allows you to create, configure, and store a game object, complete with all its components and property values as a reusable asset. In this case, it was a car. Game objects are the fundamental objects in Unity that represent characters, props, and scenery. The prefab asset acts as a template from which you can create new prefab instances in the scene. So if the car lights up or drives, all the programming you put into that one car will be saved as a prefab and then duplicated into another car. From there, you can then modify the shape and size of the cars to make them unique. This is an important part of game development because instead of having to make thousands of individual objects, you only have to make one. The next step was adding a little more detail to the street scene. I started by adding a ground and creating a few streets for the cars. Then, along the streets, I put some street lights. To do this, I made one street light and then I made a street light into a prefab and then just simply copied and pasted them. I did the same with trees, except I modified each one so that they were slightly different. Since this was just a scene and not a fully functioning game, I only needed to get the basics down, and I could finally move on to the coding part of gaming. For my second project, now that I've learned the basics of how to design a game, this project focused more on how to program the game. This video game, the video game that I made is a simulator game called Terminal Hacker. Terminal Hacker is a hacker-style game where the person that is playing the game feels like they are a hacker in real life, and they have to solve certain puzzles and riddles to hack into whatever they are trying to hack into. As the player solves more puzzles, the levels get harder. I use an application called Visual Studios, which is a third-party program that allows you to make transcript. Transcript is what is used to code. Once I got the overall design for my game, which is an old-style computer with some green hacker-styled font, it was time to code. I started by coding the JavaScript for my main menu. JavaScript is a programming language commonly used in web development. This is quite a difficult program since it was my first time coding. It was like learning a new language for the first time. I learned the hard way that coding is not easy to do for the first time. However, it got easier after a while and with some practice. Luckily, I am quite a quick learner, and soon I was making progress with my game. By the end of that section, I learned how to program my game to do specific actions like start, choose how hard the levels will be, and how many lives the player will have. The next step was to create a windscreen. The windscreen was what the player would see after they complete the final level, which will then take the player back to the main menu. I started by designing how I wanted it to look like, and then programmed it so that it automatically popped up as soon as the person completed the final level. Making this game specifically was really fun to do because it covered the basics of developing a game and mainly focused on the coding rather than the design. I hope in the future that I could make my own game that will be produced for anyone to play. However, it would take months to do, so I probably wouldn't do it by myself. Now that I've done this course, I don't think I'm going to continue with game design. Instead, I want to start doing app design. Although the two are similar, I think I'll enjoy doing app design a lot more. I'm so glad I chose to do game design for my project because it opened up a whole new world for me. I want to thank my mentor, Mr. Puai, for helping me and making sure that my project is up to par. I also want to thank my parents for supporting me and providing me with a computer and the Udemy developer course. Without them, this project would not be possible. Thank you for listening. Up next is Daniel.
Drumming is not worrying about what you can't do. It's about having fun with what you can do. A quote from Lamb of God's drummer, Chris Adler, that I think represents really well what drumming is all about. Good afternoon, parents, fellow classmates, and teachers. My name is Daniel Walton, and my grade 11 project is all about drumming. I knew this project was going to be quite challenging, and that learning to play the drums was going to be quite a task. However, I also knew that it was going to help me grow as a person, and that by the end of it, I will have looked back and realized that I really loved doing it. I believe that drums are one of the best sounding instruments. They never fail to give me goosebumps. I'm extremely fascinated by them and the extensive history behind them, and the way they came about is just as amazing. Drums are the world's oldest musical instrument. Drums first appeared nearly 8,000 years ago, as far back as 6000 BC in ancient China. They came about at around the same time as the Shang dynasty, which is the earliest ruling dynasty in China. This dynasty brought about the Bronze Age in China. The Shang dynasty was well known for their advancements in math, astronomy, military weapons, art, and as well as music. Drums in China, also known as the tangu, are nearly as old as Chinese history itself. They have always been one of the main instruments that the Chinese have used for all their traditional festivals and occasions. After the inventions of drums in China and many years of use, drums finally spread throughout Asia and Africa. They spread to Japan, the Middle East, India, Africa, and Southern Europe by the 2nd century in 1200 AD to 1500 AD. Fast forward to the 20th century, once the drums had become more popular in Europe and North America, we see the modern drum kit come about through cultural mixing. As a matter of fact, the drum kit itself is an American invention, and around the 1840s, drummers in musical theater companies and in marching bands used a whole bunch of different individual hand percussion instruments. In the 1860s, the marching bands needed to cover more roles, so they began to experiment with more and more hand percussion instruments, which they then combined and put together what was then known as a trap set. The use of drums began to venture out and started to become more popular in parties and nightclubs instead of your everyday concert hall. The drum kit began to earn a constant space on the band stage, and by the late 1940s, a style called swing drumming had changed into a new type of jazz called bebop. The rock and roll genre was most certainly established as America's most loved music. Drummers started to become the very focal points for their audiences and audio engineers. They were now being asked to come and play at much larger venues and began to require much more powerful drums, as well as a much larger variety of sounds to be able to compete with electric guitars, vocals, and keyboards. The technical aspect of drumming is very intense and requires a high level of coordination. Both hands and feet must be able to move at a certain pace and at a certain rhythm. A professional drummer will tell you that it took them many years of practice and hard work to get to build up the hand-eye-foot coordination and the ability to play at such high speeds. There are many different types of drums, such as the electronic drum, conga drums, talking drums, and rock kits. I will mainly be focusing on the classic drum kit for project purposes. There is a lot of different equipment when it comes to drumming, such as drumsticks, the throne, and the pedals and cymbals, as well as a lot of different ways to play. An example would be the difference between playing the djembe drum, which is one of the world's oldest types of drums, and the classic drum set, which we see as a part of most bands today. The classic drum kit, also called a trap set or a drum set, is basically a selection of different percussion instruments and drums. These are all set up on a stand for one single person to play. The player holds two drumsticks, one in the right hand and one in the left hand, and the pedals that are operated by the feet, one for the hi-hat and one for the big bass drum in the center of the kit. The drum kit consists of a mix of different drums, which are categorized under membranophones. Membranophones are any musical instrument that creates sound mainly by way of vibrating stretched membrane. The standard drum kit that is used in modern day music consists of the snare drum, the bass drum, the tom drums, which in a classic rock kit would consist of three different toms. The floor tom, which has the lowest pitch of the three, then tom 2 or the middle tom, and then finally tom 1, which is the highest pitch sound. The cymbals, which include the hi-hat, the ride, and the crash. The drum consists of three parts: the drum head, the drum shell, and the drum hardware. The drum head used to be made from animal skin, but today are prominently made from different kinds of plastic, such as polyester or mylar. Drumsticks are a type of percussion mallet used to play drum kits. They are usually made of hickory wood, maple, and oak. I was extremely excited to begin my practical, and it took us quite a few calls and lots of searching to find the right person to teach me, take me through my 40 hours of practical work, and keep me under their wing over the course of the year. I was extremely excited and very blessed to have come across Warren, who is my teacher. The first thing he said to me when I sat down on the throne in front of the drum kit was, "Trust me, bro, at the end of this project, you're going to be shredding." All I could do was smile, and all I could feel was this amazing energy the man has. I could see the passion he has for teaching and guiding others, and his passion for the art really has made my experience so much better. The first thing I learned was to simply just play the snare drum, bass drum, and hi-hat. The coordination that it requires is of quite a high level, and it took a couple tries to finally get even something that simple right. I realized that once I had gotten through the initial confusion of having to find the rhythm and coordination, learning new things started to become a whole lot easier. Over the next few weeks, I started to get quite a bit better. However, I was still learning a lot of the basics, as there are a lot of components when it comes to playing the drums, and it's definitely a lot harder than you think it is. My favorite things to play were the different grooves involving the hi-hat, bass drum, and snare drum. A groove is a repeated phrase that sets and maintains the rhythm and tempo. This pandemic really slowed things down for us, and unfortunately stopped us from advancing to a higher level because I needed to start following a grading system, and I had to get a textbook for it. I was really grateful when Warren told us that he has a grade 1 textbook for us. That meant the pandemic would not slow down my progress and my learning. Lessons, however, now had to be online, which is definitely not as great as being able to go to the actual drum school. The grade 1 drum exam requires you to learn 3 different songs. I listened to all the available songs and picked the 3 that I enjoyed most. We began with the first one. It had to be played at quite a high tempo, so it was probably the song that took me the longest to learn. After I'd finally learned the song, which took me about 2 weeks, the other songs came to me quite easily. I'd completed the required 40 hours of practical work. I'd finished 28 hours of work at the actual studio with Warren, and then at least another 15 hours on the kit playing by myself. This whole experience was great for me and did a great job at teaching me discipline. I would like to thank the school for the opportunity, and I would like to thank Mrs. Godlinton for the help and support she provided me as my mentor. I would also like to thank my parents and my drum teacher, Warren, for taking me to lessons and providing me with everything that I needed. Thank you.
That concludes our afternoon of speeches. Please drive safely. Thank you.